Good afternoon, everyone. I must commend you on being so prompt and on time. Obviously, you're under holy obedience, so you need to be here. At Christendom College, everything's like 10 minutes late. It's one thing about being prompt is you're the only one there to appreciate it normally. It's a great joy to have with us today and to be able to introduce Sheila Liaugminas. She is an Emmy Award-winning journalist with extensive experience in both secular and religious journalism. Her writing covers a variety of topics, with her particular interest being the Catholic Church, faith, culture, politics, and the media. She began her career in journalism working for the Dayton Journal-Herald, a newspaper in Ohio, and then for Dayton's CBS affiliate. In Chicago, she reported for Time magazine for more than 20 years and contributed to a number of cover stories. She also contributed to the Chicago Tribune and Crane's Chicago Business. At Chicago's NBC affiliate, WMAQ-TV, she served as co-host of the Emmy Award-winning 1984 program, You, and guest hosted a morning talk show there. She has been active in the religious media with contributions to publications such as the National Catholic Registrar, Crisis Magazine, Adoremus Bulletin, Voices, which is the publication for women, faith, and family. She has appeared as guest on other shows on Relevant Radio Network as well as on the Ave Maria Radio Network. She currently hosts a one-hour interview program centered on current events, entitled A Closer Look with Sheila Liaugminas. The weekday program features notable experts, newsmakers, and elected officials, scholars, and clergy. By applying her many gifts, decades of experience in print and broadcast journalism, she and her guests put the news of the day into sharp focus from a uniquely Catholic perspective. She is married, has 2 sons. One is a priest for the Archdiocese of Chicago, who I think is in Rome. Is that true? Wonderful. The other is a graduate student and a writer studying abroad. Sounds very Hemingway-esque. She resides in the Chicago, Illinois area. We're delighted to have her with us this afternoon, and her talk is entitled Having Our Answers Ready, Combating the Cultural Climate of Confusion and Scorn. Let's welcome her today.
Thank you so much. Please let me know anybody here if you're not able to hear me. I doubt that's going to be a problem for me, though, because I talk a lot and loudly and might move my hands to the point where you would think I was Italian. However, my mother has said, tie that girl's hands behind her back and she can't talk. Well, I'm so impressed by you all from the moment I stepped foot back on this marvelous campus where my son studied for years, by the energy I have seen with the young people here, the beautiful presence of the clergy here, the religious life, and the laity. This is the Church Universal. We are here, we are in Rome, our brothers and sisters, we are in solidarity all over the world, and we are of a mind. And it's all of a piece what's happening in this magnanimous week for the Catholic Church right now. We are in historic times. Such historic times. And it's important that we seize the opportunity to take advantage. It's an opportunity for us as laity and as religious, each of us in our own vocation, to do what the Church, Christ commanded from the very beginning with the apostles. Go out to all the world and tell the good news. And in each time, that has to be renewed as a call. And so that's part of be ready to make a defense for what you believe, part of this very theme, and part of what we need to talk about right now, and engaging a culture that's all but lost or has lost sense of what truth actually is. And the sense of the transcendent, the sense that there is such a thing as truth, and that it comes from something higher than ourselves. We have a lot of work to do. Pope Paul VI, in his provocative observation in Evangelii Nuntiandi, said that The split between the gospel and culture is without doubt the drama of our time. That is an earth-shaking statement. And it has become all the more true since he said that. The split between the gospel and the culture of our time is without doubt the biggest drama of our time. But each successive pope, since before him and since him, especially since him, have addressed that, which brings together what's happening in Rome tomorrow at the canonization. I've been calling it on radio this week with great guests, 4 popes, 2 saints, 2 present. What do I mean by that? Of course, 2 popes are being canonized, with the presiding Pope Francis. And the strong likelihood, many people believe, that Pope Benedict will be present as well in St. Peter's Square. This is historic in many ways, but for that reason alone, we have not had a Pope Emeritus before. So this is the time the Church is being watched by the whole world, and those 4 popes represent what we need to focus on in Paul VI's provocative observation about the split between the gospel and the culture. Because the Second Vatican Council was convened by John the 23rd, of course you know. But what many people in the pews, the laity, and in the world don't know is that the Second Vatican Council was a missionary council. That it was called, people like to say, some people in some factions, if you will, or of some thinking, like to say that John the 23rd said, throw open the windows of the church to let the world in. But really what he meant was to let the church out, to let Jesus out, to let the faith out into the world, into the streets, into where our current Pope says the existential peripheries where people are suffering, and we'll get to our current Pope. But taking it through the 4 popes who are going to be there tomorrow, they are all significant for this topic and this weekend's reflections, because John the 23rd called that council to be against the advice of some advisors and some pundits. He called it, out of inspiration of the Holy Spirit, to be a missionary council, to address the church in the modern world, to reset, to use a current politically popular term, to reset and send the church out into the modern world. The clergy are to sanctify the laity, and the laity are to sanctify the world, though we all are about it all. And so this became a very big matter for the church to send the laity out into the world and proclaim the gospel. From that time on, each successive pope has made it his mission to carry out the gospel mandate that was at the center of the Second Vatican Council. John Paul II and Benedict XVI made it the key to their entire pontificate and dedicated each of them, their entire pontificate, to the implementation of the true Second Vatican Council, the documents, the teachings of the Council Fathers, to carry those out, to teach them and to see them enacted and implemented. Both of them did. Along comes Pope Francis and he's saying, now let's just get this done. The other 2 participated. John Paul II participated in the council. Benedict participated in the council. They had a great role. John Paul II had a very significant impact on the council. This is our first Pope who did not take part in that council. He's the Pope who says, rubber meets the road now. Let's get going. John Paul II said in an address to a group of American bishops, the future of democracy, so he's addressing what we have in America, the future of democracy, and I left the book on my pew, but I'm addressing this in a book I just wrote for Ignatius Press because why? Inspiration came. What the church teaches and why. I'll grab that in a minute. What the church teaches and why. Our popes come to America and they address our democracy. Thank you so much. I was there to cover Pope Benedict's apostolic visit to the United States in 2008, stood on the south lawn of the White House President Bush, Pope Benedict XVI were there. The crowd was glorious. It was a day just like today. It was glorious. And there was so much love that even some of the hardened press corps I was standing in the midst of seemed to just be awed by him. I remember one of them turned to the other and said, "Remember the sizable crowd for the Queen, how that kind of broke the records?" He said, "This is bigger." It was a larger crowd for the Pope. And what did he address? Each of our popes come to the US and they address democracy. And both of them went on to address the UN General Assembly, the United Nations General Assembly, about what they stood for when they were founded in their charter, International Charter for Human Rights and the International Declaration for Human Rights. That's bringing back the grammar that our country was founded on and that each of these institutions were founded on, which is why I had to write this book, bringing it together with what our church teaches and why on these so important issues of the day. So, John Paul II said, in America, the future of democracy depends on a culture capable of forming men and women who are prepared to defend certain truths and values. That's our theme, isn't it? Be prepared to make a defense for what you believe. He stated that in this important address. So how to arrive at a secure democracy based on a culture of informed men and women who know truth in the first place and values derived from the truth, and then are prepared to do what's necessary to defend them. Borrowing from Romans 10, chapter 10, 14, 15. Do what's necessary to defend those truths and the values. They must first hear truth to learn it. And how will they hear it unless they're told? To be scriptural again. And how will they be told unless someone in a position of authority or authenticity speaks it? And who might that be? For the longest time since the Second Vatican Council, or after the Second Vatican Council, sadly, it was not the Pope and the Church's teachings those who determined what is spoken and what is believed and acted upon in our society were the media and the politicians for a very long time. Do they speak truth? Are they even willing to accept it when it runs counter to their popular beliefs? Clearly not. Communications is a moral act. John Paul II said and wrote that often. The power of words. So many Americans base their opinions. This is an important aside to think about our trajectory forward. Still, so many Americans base their opinions on biased and misleading information and fail to realize that they're being manipulated. How? By use of language. Control language and you control thought. The more language is abused, the more easily that power can be abused. We see this happening all the time. But it has an ancient history. I love this it would fit in your pocket, the size of this little book. This little book, Abuse of Language, Abuse of Power, by Joseph Pieper. Joseph Pieper observed that Plato had a lifelong battle with the sophists, those, quote, highly paid and popularly applauded experts in the art of twisting words, who were able to sweet-talk something bad into something good, and to turn white into black. Sound familiar? If you retool the vocabulary to change or camouflage the meanings of words, you can justify anything. Right around that time when I was reading this book, I reread Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and George Orwell's 1984, and considering where we are with abortion, harvesting fetal body parts, genetic engineering, stem cell research, cloning, mass deception, and thought control, I found them chillingly provocative and prophetic in the account they gave of a captive and endangered society. How in the world did it become legal to kill babies? We're celebrating 40 years of this great institution. It was 41 years ago that, of course, as you know, Roe was handed down, wiping out all the abortion laws in the United States, en masse. The stunning rewriting of the Constitution that required probably stands as one of the most sweeping abuses of thought control and of control of the language since Hitler's recrafting of words to justify the genocide by calling Jews, quote, parasites, robbing them of their human dignity in hideous ways. The Dred Scott decision declared slaves did not have personhood and thus no constitutional rights. Roe v. Wade did the same thing. It took an entire class of human beings and declared them unworthy of rights. This is doublethink. How could this happen? Because what the Holy Father called the skepticism regarding the very existence of moral truth and an objective moral law in American society is still pervasive, he said back then. He said it's prevalent in cultural institutions that influence public opinion, which is why John Paul spoke so often of public opinion and communications as a moral act. Just to finish off Joseph Pieper and the Holy Father working off of that, Joseph Pieper put it this way: the place of authentic reality is taken over by a fictitious reality. My perception is indeed still directed toward an object, but now it's a pseudo-reality, deceptively appearing as real so that it almost becomes impossible anymore to discern the truth. He wrote this a long time ago. For the general public, he said, is being reduced to a state where people are not only unable to find out about the truth, but also become unable to even search for the truth, because they're satisfied with deception and trickery. And that's determined their convictions. Satisfied with the fictitious reality created by design through the abuse of language. Language, the word. That's why I'm captivated by the beginning of John, the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word. The Word made flesh. This is what our missionary mandate is to take that out into the world. But what will we need? John Paul taught us this, Benedict taught us this, and now Francis. Personal holiness. Second Vatican Council taught us that. Conversion, personal holiness. To rebuild a moral society on the foundation of objective truth. Introduce the world again to the fact that it exists. But of course not on a podium. And not, here's truth. And not, you're wrong. Because as Father Barron, the esteemed rector of this fine institution, likes to say, that's a non-starter. That's going to stop the conversation or shut it down before it gets started. We have to lead with joy, lead with beauty. And then, he said, people will come to the truth. What is good, what is true, what is right. So John Paul, to this address in America, said, your country prides itself on being a realized democracy, but democracy is itself a moral adventure, a continuing test of the people's capacity to govern themselves in ways that serve the common good and the good of individual citizens. That's why I wrote this book, because we are participants in this elected representative republic. We have to be informed and engaged in building up this democracy. The survival of this democracy, he said, depends not only on its institutions, but actually to a greater extent to the spirit that inspires and permeates us, our culture, our population, for legislating, administering, for judging. And it's imperiled when politics and law are cut or sundered from any connection to the moral law written on the human heart. This is what is denied in cultural conversations today, that there is such a thing as the natural law. But we don't need to take recourse to religion or what the church teaches to engage in that debate. It can be engaged and won on reason alone. If constitutional and statutory law, he said, aren't held accountable to objective moral law, the first casualties are justice and equity. Just take a look at where we are today, with so-called war on women being a campaign slogan to hide other agenda. Other slogans and catchphrases are used. Hemlock Society changed their name to Compassion and Choices. Talk about doublethink. To get people in America who are very compassionate people to think, well, I have compassion, I don't want anyone to suffer. Whereas, and compassion truly means to suffer with, not off somebody's life when they're depressed. And that constitutes one of the reasons why people can be euthanized by that movement. John Paul asks us this provocative question: why should I regard my fellow citizen as my equal in that kind of a culture? Why should I defend someone else's rights? Why should I work for the good? If moral truths can't be publicly acknowledged as moral truths, democracy is impossible. So he cares very much about our democracy, as we must. Back in late last year, several months ago, I watched an interview on CNN's Anderson Cooper, conducted with 4 New York Times journalists. This was fascinating, who had been kidnapped in Libya. And I listened intently as they recounted their terrifying ordeal. And one of them spoke up. Their hands were bound. They were ordered to lie on the floor face down, belly down. They refused, saying they knew their captors could easily shoot them in the back with no hesitation if they did. I was riveted by listening to this. One of the men, there was a woman, 3 men, one of the men said that instead of lying on the floor belly down, face down, he dropped to his knees but continued to look his gun-wielding captor in the eye. He said as long as he faced them, he believed it would be harder for them to shoot him. He was right. It saved their lives. Why? Because looking another person in the eye, face to face, humanizes them. Communications is a moral act. Whatever we've gained in the world of instant social communications, we've lost that personal contact, that face-to-face. John Paul was so taken by that idea and so insistent that we be engaged in public communications, in social communications, but bring back the face of Christ. And so was Benedict, and so is Francis. Blessed John Paul II, think about this, reached more people on the face of this earth than any other in history. In his final months of life, he issued what became my mission statement in the media, an apostolic letter called Rapid Development. Sounds like a military exercise, right? It's called the Rapid Development to those responsible for communications, but it's all of us now because we're all involved. Facebook, Twitter, whether you have a blog, you're texting, you're tweeting, we're all involved in communications. So it's to all of us. Among its more profound appeals is the acknowledgement that the first Areopagus of modern times is the world of communications, which is capable of unifying humanity and transforming it into, as is commonly referred, he said, the global village. They used to say about John Paul, if the world is a global village, he was the village priest. He said, ours is an age of global communication in which countless moments, and think about how much this has changed just since the time he wrote this, countless moments of human existence are either spent with or confronted by the different processes of the mass media. And that was before Facebook and Twitter. Modern technologies increased to a remarkable extent, he said, the speed, quantity, and accessibility of communication. But above all, they don't favor, and I love this line, that delicate exchange that takes place between mind and mind, heart and heart, and which should characterize any communication at the service of solidarity and love. That's when he then turned and said, Jesus teaches that communication is a moral act. Quote, he quotes scripture, a good person brings forth good out of a store of goodness, but an evil person brings forth evil out of his store. I tell you, on the day of judgment, another really good line, people will render an account for every careless word they speak. By your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. That is a powerful indictment. That is a powerful contemplation for us now. I have a blog on Mercatornet. It's easily remembered as SheilaReports.com, but in my blog, Mercatornet hosts it. They're based in Australia and New Zealand, therefore we have, not only are we read world over, but they have a very big following in Australia and New Zealand, Oceania. They're in Philippines. We have a lot of readers there. We have a lot in Africa. We have a lot on continental Europe. And in my blog, before Pope Benedict stepped down and Pope Francis was elevated to the papacy, before all of that, months before that, I, in my own prayer time, started discerning strongly the call to shift tone, if you will, not emphasis in some ways, in how I do what I do, in writing a blog, in engaging hot button issues of the day even. Not that I don't. Something was happening. The Holy Spirit was moving powerfully. People I know in media, scholars, in institutions of academia, many people I know were telling me the same thing. I'm feeling something going on. And what I felt was my own need to change the tone. So I bring this up now because so much am I trying on that blog to address the issues of the day, but in a way that's going to engage people who not only don't believe Catholic beliefs, Christian beliefs, they're atheists, and they make no bones about telling you that in the what we know as the box, the comment section under each blog post. Well, the other day I posted a blog post, and I essentially asked in the headline and then in the post itself, are we still able to disagree civilly? And then I laid out a blog post snipping from a few excellent articles, making excellent cases in those articles, and just used those snips to weave together a blog post. Are we still able, actually I'm really asking that, to disagree civilly? Well, if you went there and read the comments box, I guess that sort of answered that question. The last time I checked, it was well over 44 comments, which, in some blogs that's not a lot, and in mine it gets up there and it gets down there, but you should see the snarky, nasty, back and forth fighting that has been going on in that so-called forum, because it is a forum, but I'm always asking people to use it as a civil forum for civil discourse. And if you're going to disagree, that's fine. Make a reason for your defense of your position, your ideology. Don't attack, and certainly not ad hominem, and that's exactly what they're doing, even by name. Another one will jump on and say, well, David, you're this and this and this, and the other one, David will jump back on and say, well, Dania, you're this and this and this. And David is an avowed, I think, atheist, certainly talks badly against the Catholic Church. And after following me for years, he just let me know recently, Sheila, I've come to respect you. And I thought, well, thank you. I kind of hear from both sides, you're too conservative, you're too liberal. Well, I'm following the bishops in the church and the Pope, so I guess maybe that's right. I'm doing something right. But David said that, I think, because maybe he detected that shift in tone. Meanwhile, they're not changing their tone. So I bring that up because communications is a moral act, introducing the face of Jesus again to the world of Facebook, to the world of blogging, to the world of Twitter, to your own texting, to the people you actually see face to face. I love Cardinal George's line. I wish I had thought of this. Jesus is God's Facebook. That's so true. In successive messages issued for the annual World Day of Communications, Pope Benedict sharpened the focus even more on the rapidly developing nature of social networking media. Why? Because this is how we're communicating to the world. This is our Areopagus. This is our way to evangelize, to keep the gospel mandate current and relevant. He said in the digital world, transmitting information increasingly makes it made known within a social network where knowledge is shared and all of these multitude of personal exchanges. But he said this gets to the downside, if you will, of the removal of the human face. There's a new appreciation of communication, he said. It's a dialogue, it's an exchange, it's solidarity. You can create positive relationships. On the other hand, it removes the human face unless we humanize the digital world. And he called on us for that. In fact, his message for the next World Day of Communications was new technologies, new relationships, promoting a culture of respect, dialogue, and friendship. See, people have a desire, a deep desire for connectedness. We have answers to questions they haven't thought to ask yet. So we engage, but in a way that reaches out to them, and we have their attention with joy, with the fact that I respect you. I trust that what you say here you believe is true, based on your premise. Let's talk about our premise. Let's talk about our premises. Let's talk about your premise and my premise. Engage. Show them a happy face, joyful face. Digital soul is what Benedict called it. Cyberspace can be so cold. How do we do that? It's impersonal. There's a glut of humanity on it, which is why the Italian bishops organized a congress on technological communications. And Pope Benedict talked to them about bringing heart and warmth into cyberspace. He said, evident in the diminishing the spirit of criticism. He said, so he called out the spirit of criticism that's on my blog, in my com box, if you will. It's a spirit of criticism that diminishes the other person. He said, evident in that is that in the truth reduced to an interplay of opinions. That's getting back to there is no such thing as truth, just interplay of opinions. He said, we're witnessing in all of that a pollution of the spirit, which clouds faces and makes them less prone to smile. A smile is a great tool of evangelization, by the way. And yet, he added, the aim of that conference of Italian bishops to address these technological challenges is precisely to recognize faces and then overcome these dynamics. And when that happens, people become souls again, not just bodies without souls. So how is it possible to return to that? By inhabiting that digital universe with a believing heart, he said. So that's two of our popes. Pope Benedict, time and again, repeated with some urgency that modern man is living as if God does not exist. He said that over and over. Acting and making decisions with no reference to God. In January 2012, so later in his pontificate, he issued a weighty message to Catholics in America through our bishops, warning that ours is a culture of radical secularism and one growing increasingly hostile to Christianity. Well, it wasn't long later that he stepped down, coming forward through our popes, John the 23rd calling the council, the missionary council, John Paul II dedicating his entire pontificate to the implementation of that council, Benedict, who participated in it, continuing these messages, but then updating them as they apply to the culture that denies the existence of God, and the culture that's incredibly technologically connected now. So he resigned when he did, and the church awaited the next step. What now? Because the modern times had popes that attended and had a significant impact on the Second Vatican Council and tried to carry it out. The next pope, whoever he was going to be, wherever he was going to be from, would be the first who had not attended that council, as I said. By the way, papal biographer George Weigel on my program called Pope Benedict XVI the greatest papal preacher since Gregory the Great, and declared he will be recognized as such for a long time to come. It's going to take generations to unpack our great popes. But he said the wave of the future is going to have to center on a missionary church. This was before the conclave or during it, when George was on the program. And he said, the next pope is going to have to center on the missionary church and its mission to convert the world. He has to be have a transparent faith. He must be a charismatic pastor. This was before the election. And a reformer. The church's bureaucracy can be an impediment to evangelization. So, In the interregnum, before the conclave began, different cardinals got up and gave their 5-minute intervention message, what they saw the church to be, the mission going forward, what they thought the church needed. Whoever wanted to speak did. Cardinal Bergoglio got up and used less than his 5 minutes to say a very pithy 4-point message. And it was all about evangelization. He called it "Evangelizing Implies Apostolic Zeal." That was the little headline on it. And the reason we know that is one of his brother cardinals was so taken by this, as many of them were, I've heard since, that he asked for a copy of it, which is why we have it. Cardinal Bergoglio said, "Evangelizing presupposes a desire for the church to come out of herself. The church is called to come out of herself and go out to the peripheries." It was the first time we heard that from him, and we've been hearing it ever since. Not only geographically, that sounds like other third world countries, right? Developing nations, the existential peripheries. Existential peripheries can be right in front of you, us. It can be in our family. It can be the person we work with, the person down the street, somebody we know. Because he calls the existential peripheries the mystery of sin, of pain, of injustice, of ignorance, of indifference to religion, of intellectual currents in our culture, and of all miseries. He said when the church doesn't come out of herself to evangelize, she becomes self-referential and gets sick. Self-referential was a term that captivated a number of cardinals, among them our own Cardinal George, who told me that on my radio program. He says, what I said earlier, I picked this up from Cardinal Bergoglio. He said, in Revelation, Jesus says he stands at the door and knocks. Obviously, the text refers to his knocking from the outside in order to enter, but Bergoglio said, I think about the times in which Jesus knocks from within, so we'll let him come out. The self-referential church keeps Jesus Christ within herself and doesn't let him out. He said, when the church is self-referential, inadvertently, she believes she has her own light. Well, then he finishes with this before sitting down. Thinking of the next pope, said Bergoglio, he must be a man who, from the contemplation and adoration of Jesus Christ, that's where it starts, the sacraments, adoration, Jesus Christ. Then he must go out to the existential peripheries. That helps her, the church, be a fruitful mother who gains life from the sweet and comforting joy of evangelizing. How many people look at that or even think of evangelizing as a sweet and comforting joy? The existential peripheries, that's exactly where the church needs to be at this time. So, he's elected. And then, among other things, he, of course, adds to Lumen Fidei with Pope Benedict, but he issues his own Evangelii Gaudium, joy of the gospel. It's so Francis. You can just read him in it. And I thought it was so Francis-like that in paragraph 25, I mean, it's all evangelization. It's all about getting out to the existential peripheries, coming out of ourselves, engaging the world right where they are, in their misery, in their suffering, in their injustices. But in paragraph 25, issuing this document, he says, I am aware that nowadays documents do not arouse the same interest as in the past and that they are quickly forgotten after he issues a document. But he said he urgently had to write this because he said, quote, we cannot leave things as they presently are. See, his change of tone is grabbing people who might not have read the lofty, brilliant theological writings and addresses of Pope Benedict, the great preacher, and the beautiful writings of John Paul and his personalism and his philosophy of the human person at the center of everything is human dignity. People who didn't avail themselves of those documents or teachings or addresses are getting this. They're hearing this. It's grabbing them. It's reaching them. He said, throughout the world, let us be permanently in a state of mission. From line 1 to the very end of Evangelii Gaudium, he says we must be in mission. Then he says, I dream of a missionary option, that is, a missionary impulse. Think of what an impulse is. It comes from within, capable of transforming everything. That's it. Well, it's ambitious, but it's totally doable. So he said, so that the church's customs, her way of doing things, her times and schedules, her language and structures can be suitably channeled to the evangelization of today's world rather than her own self-preservation. Whoa, he gives us a lot of zingers, doesn't he? His homilies every morning at Mass. I can't wait to read what they are every day. He said the final chapter of Evangelii Gaudium, which is kind of our program for this talk and for this conference and for this contemplation of what our job is in the world in engaging a culture and making a defense for what we believe. That's our program, Evangelii Gaudium, in some ways. The final chapter is dedicated to spirit-filled evangelizers. It's one thing to talk about what we believe, but are we led by the Spirit? Are we filled with the Spirit is what he's saying. Who fearlessly are open to the workings of the Holy Spirit. He's a man of strong words. And who have the courage to proclaim the newness of the gospel with boldness in every time and place, even when it meets with opposition. Well, it's meeting with opposition all over the place, including my blog, and sometimes on our airwaves when I get a caller or somebody who writes in, and they totally didn't hear what we said, right? I mean, one caller called in one time and was kind of upset about one thing. That doesn't happen often, thank you, Lord. But she was quite upset and worked up. And she repeated back something that, and I before thinking, blurted out, is that what you heard? Is that what you thought you heard? And the crew in the studio were laughing, like, whoa. And I said, that's not what we said. So see, allow me to clarify. I mean, she can go back and listen to the podcast and hear. That's not what we said. This is our culture. So how we say what we say is very important. So Francis ends this with saying, Jesus wants us to touch human misery, which you see him doing, going into St. Peter's and embracing, beeline for the sick, the impaired, the disfigured, the disabled. He is right there embracing them, showing us the way. He is, as Father Steve Grunow from Word on Fire often calls it, the Pope of the grand gesture. That's why the world's noticing so much. Jesus wants us to touch human misery and touch the suffering flesh of others. In our dealings with the world, we're told to give reasons for our hope, he wrote in Evangelii Gaudium. That's the conference. That's this message today. In our dealings with the world, we're told to give reasons for our hope. He said, only the person who feels happiness in seeking the good of others is desiring their happiness, and only then can they be missionary. The Pope urges us not to be discouraged before failure. Listen, this is important, because so many people say this to me, and sometimes I feel it too. So it's important to go back and read and Lectio Divina and contemplate and, okay, it's not all on me. It's important to remind ourselves of this. He said, so Francis urges us in Evangelii Gaudium not to be discouraged before failure or scarce results or lack of them visible to us. Since, quote, fruitfulness is often invisible. We know that. Elusive, unquantifiable. He said, we must know only that our commitment is necessary. And I love that he ended, there's a Marian style to the church and her work of evangelization, because whenever we look to Mary, we come to believe once again in the revolutionary nature of love and tenderness. He just so often says, don't be afraid of tenderness. It's a hardened world out there. I have to check my time. I can go way over accidentally. When Pope Francis first made an apostolic journey outside of Rome, he went to the small island of Lampedusa, and I don't know how many of you knew of it. I had not heard of Lampedusa, and I travel a lot in the world. But it is sort of the Ellis Island for them there. It is it is so far off the tip of Sicily that it is closer to Tunisia. And that's where many people come by boat seeking refuge on mainland Europe, seeking a better life. their families, themselves. When he learned that many of them perished at sea, were being taken advantage of, were dying, he said it pierced his heart. Well, this was early in his papacy, and it was stunning. To me, that short homily was stunning. When he said, he challenged our consciences. He challenged us to think about the other, capital O, and challenged us to not look at them as the other, but a brother or sister to be loved, and not just, quote, another person who disturbs our life and our comfort. Ooh, that's how a lot of people look at people. How often do such people fail to find understanding, acceptance, and solidarity in us, he asked. Today, no one in our world feels responsible for others, he said. Well, maybe not no one, but he nailed it. We may say, oh, that's too bad, and then go our way. It's not our responsibility, and with that, we feel reassured. But he said, what are we going to do about it? Congressman Jeff Fortenberry comes on my program and says when he goes back to his home district, he holds town hall meetings, and he listens, and he remembers when he was with a group of, I think, 4 men who were giving him point after point after point after point of things that in that district they felt were wrong, or in this country, and in Washington they felt were wrong, and they wanted him to act on it. And he listened until they were done. And then he said, okay, I heard what you said. I hear you. Now, what are you doing about it? And I thought that was wonderful. The Pope said that, because complacency is not an option. If we're not part of the solution, we're part of the problem. Everyone here knows that. One time at a parish talk, at the end, I do a lot of Q&As. A woman stood up and after several asked questions, one woman stood up and she was perturbed. Well, Sheila, you're just preaching to the choir here is the problem. The people who turned out that night. And I was a little jarred by that, and I said, well, then it's time for the choir to sing. And they loved it. I mean, I was startled by the standing applause that got. But it's because it is. What does a choir do? It practices, right? It learns the music. They have to be on the same note at the same time. They have to be in harmony. They have to know their material. It takes planning. It takes practice. It's a vocation. It's beauty. We have to show the world beauty and not be this culture of indifference. The culture of comfort, says Francis, leads to the globalization of indifference. And I thought that might become for him what the dictatorship of relativism became for John Paul II. Just try to wrap up here. The importance of what we do in the ability to connect with the world. Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen says Father Barron would give his right arm to have the ability to reach the world that we have today, each and every one of us. Became crystallized to me in many communications, but this one young woman wrote me a letter and sent it by email after discovering my blog. And she begins, Dear Sheila, my name is Yvette Twagira Maria, originally from Rwanda. I'm a 23-year-old journalism student, currently in my final year. She was in England, at Westminster, University of Westminster. I need your help in contribution to my dissertation on a sensitive topic. What international media could have done best to prevent the Rwandan genocide of 1994? I was really startled by this. So I really put time into reading this through. And what makes this even more difficult is the tribal, very violent battle between the Tutsis and the Hutu. She said, this dissertation will be written by a critical journalism student who wants to understand the role of international media, communications media, which now becomes all of us because we have that ability, in developing countries and its role in preventing genocide. I want to know, understand better if the media did their job to alert the people about genocide in Rwanda, transfer that to Syria today, any number of other places. Or if they just waited for it to happen and then reported about it when millions of innocents have been killed. She said, my purpose is to give voice to experts and victims of the genocide and explore the role of international media. She gave her background. She knows that it's going to definitely be questioned because of her own tribal heritage. But she said, my aim is to understand how in such a delicate situation we can play a role of prevention, protection, and education. This is a woman from Rwanda studying in England who found me on the internet. Every one of you can have, all of us have that ability to reach people. And at the end of this, her very last sentence, please consider my work won't have the same impact on the readers without your contribution. Wow. So I felt duty-bound to contact her, but it was to say, thank you for reaching out. There's a reason why people connect with us or we connect with them. That's spirit-led, I believe. And it doesn't take more than just, as Pope Francis tells us these days, so often, create a culture of encounter. Because today's media gives us every opportunity to do that. And that's how I'll close and kind of open the going out from here. In his first message for World Day of Communications, so now we've come through all 4 popes that we'll see tomorrow, I believe, in one way or another. Pope Francis made his first message for World Day of Communications, the culture of encounter, highlighting how we who engage social media should always be at the service of going out to others. The theme of it was communications, social networking media, at the service of an authentic culture of encounter. He said that can help us feel closer to one another. It offers immense possibilities to be in solidarity with others, which is a gift from God. Or we can just drop it and not use that, which is, to me, not an option. Emphasizing the importance of recovering our sense of deliberateness, I loved that, and calm. Be deliberate, be calm, as well as the ability to be silent and listen. After all, a dialogue is speaking and listening, two-way exchange. He said, people only express themselves fully when they're not merely tolerated, but that they are truly accepted. How then can communication be at the service of an authentic counter of culture, he asks? The answer can be found in the gospel when Jesus tells us that everyone is our neighbor. In order to really truly understand this, he tells us, look at the parable of the Good Samaritan and how much the Samaritans have taught us lately by the parable of the Good Samaritan and the woman at the well, and the contemplation of both with Jesus. So he said there's a revolution taking place right now in our ability through technology to reach the world, and it represents a great and thrilling challenge. May we respond to that challenge with fresh energy and imagination as we seek to share with others the beauty of God. Thank you. Real last thing. Just to tell you what this is. This was, and it says it in here, how it was inspired. A young scholar asking me, do you have a book on what the church teaches about the top hot button issues of the day and why? Like what's in faithful citizenship? I know there aren't a whole lot of people who really access faithful citizenship, the bishop's document. That's really kind of, it's long. It's what the church teaches and why. And I said, sure, I have that. And I looked through my bookshelves and I didn't. And I said, well, there's this and there's this. And he said, no, I've looked too. And he has deep, tall bookshelves. I can't find it. So when the time came, I thought, okay, I'll do that. But it's not just what the church teaches and why, living the gospel of life and faithful citizenship. It goes further. Because I thought then that would be telling the choir again, what we believe and what we must do, right? So it starts with Abraham Lincoln in the Emancipation Proclamation. It goes through the UN, writing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and what that said. Dr. Martin Luther King and the Great Civil Rights Movement. Pope John XXIII in Pacem in Terris. Our other popes. And what our church teaches and why. So that's what this is, essential principles of a just society and humane culture, because it should be something we should be able to engage the culture on any level about with not only tolerance, but truly understanding and goodwill. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Sheila. We'll take a 10-minute break before we come back for our panel discussion with the bishops.